I don't care what kind of dad podcast you're running. If you're using explicit language, you got things you got to take care of, and you better make sure you take care of them or you're going to be in a heap of trouble. How to use and set explicit tags for your podcast and its individual episodes in this episode of Podcastification. My name is Kerry Green, and I am the Client Happiness Guy at PodcastFastTrack.com, and this is Podcastification. This show is all about podcasting. How to do it, how not to do it, best practices, interesting news items that have to do with the realm of podcasting, and who knows what else. And I'm trying to do it all with a little bit of fun and some information to help you get a show going, keep yours going, or make it better. And if you like what's going on here on the show, I would appreciate it, so appreciate it, if you could leave a rating or review on iTunes. You can find out how to do that at podcastfasttrack.com/review. That's enough of that kind of stuff. Let's get you podcastificated right away. You know, free speech is a big deal, especially in the United States, which is where I'm broadcasting from. And I'm not one to say that you or anybody else can't or shouldn't say whatever you want to say in whatever way you want to say it. But it's only common sense to realize that people or companies that provide platforms upon which you are able to say what you want to say in the way you want to say it have their right to limit what you say over their platform. Did you get that? It's their platform. They get to make the rules, and they do. Places like iTunes have created criteria that you have to agree to if you're going to use their platform to make your content available to people. Now, for some reason, it's easy to forget that with web services like iTunes and Stitcher and even Facebook for that matter. But they are those kinds of platforms. They have those kinds of rules. Today's episode is focused exclusively on the issue of explicit content, and more specifically, the explicit tag in iTunes. Now, you may think this doesn't apply to you. After all, you keep your show clean all the way around. That's great. You may be right that you'll never have to deal with this issue at all. But what if someday you have a guest on your show whose native language is the four-letter word? What are you going to do then? Some folks would beep out every instance. That's cool if that's what you want to do. But what if it's not really all that bad? What if they only use one or two colorful words and they actually lend to the emphasis or the context of what they're saying? That might be a good time for you to know how to use the explicit tags the right way on what I would call an episode level. That way you can label that one episode explicit and the rest can keep their no rating or clean rating tag intact. Did you know you could label just one episode with explicit and leave the rest of your show non-labeled or clean? You can. Keep listening. I'm going to tell you how to do it using two of the most popular avenues, through Libsyn and through Blueberry. And before we get into the details, let me say this. I'm going to be referring to some very specific functions inside the Libsyn interface and the Blueberry PowerPress plugin. And being an audio podcast, I'm going to do my very best to describe exactly how you can find those functions. But in case you need to see the visual or recheck what I say, you can find all those sorts of things in the show notes, including images. In this episode's show notes, they'll be at podcastfasttrack.com/13 or podcastfasttrack.com/explicit tag. I give you both just because I don't know which is easier for you to remember. Okay, let's get going. Now first, let's talk about why the explicit tag is important. I covered this a little bit in the last episode, but let me quickly sum up. The explicit tag's main use is twofold. Number one, it's a heads up to potential listeners that they may get an earful of colorful language or topics in your show if you label it explicit. But more importantly, it's used by the iTunes search filters to make the parental controls of iTunes work right. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that, but I will quickly tell you that if a parent sets their parental controls in iTunes to block explicit content, and little Johnny downloads your show that is not tagged as explicit, but it does indeed have content, you've just made an enemy. And they may complain to iTunes, and your show may get the boot. Find out more about iTunes parental controls at podcastfasttrack.com/PC. Okay, let's move on. So what qualifies as explicit and what doesn't qualify as explicit? Some people are a bit concerned about this, so let's do what we can to clear it up. Is one F-bomb considered explicit? What about the S word or the A word or a reference to the sex act? It can get a bit fuzzy when you boil it down like that. And Apple doesn't give us any kind of specifics to define what explicit means. So here's what I've been able to discover. I had a quick online chat with Todd Cochran over at Blueberry. You can find out more about Blueberry at www.blueberry.com, and that's Blueberry with no E's. They are a great media hosting site and the creators of the Blueberry PowerPress plugin. Okay, now Todd said that in his years of experience dealing with iTunes and many podcasts and podcasters who have used their service, shows that contain X-rated content typically don't show up in the iTunes directory at all after a while. So on the far extreme, there appears to be one clear boundary. X-rated content is out of the question. But on the other end, curse words, crass language, and even references to sexual topics or things seem to be okay to include with your content if you use the explicit tag, at least on that episode. And that leads us to the guts of what we want to talk about. How to tag your show or your episodes as explicit. There are two ways that you can use the explicit tag, and I've already referred to both. Number one is by tagging the entire podcast feed as explicit, or number two, by tagging an individual episode as explicit. Let's start with the entire podcast feed. This is what you want to set for your show if it's going to be explicit most or all of the time. And when we say labeling your feed as explicit, we mean the entire podcast, the whole enchilada. You're going to set this up in the place where you generate the feed that you submit to iTunes. Now, I'm going to cover the two most popular options. That's the Blueberry PowerPress plugin and in Libsyn's publishing solution. Now, some of you are still using FeedBurner, and I guess that's okay, but my advice is to run away as fast as you can. You can find out more about the FeedBurner issue and why I would say that at the very end of episode 9 at podcastfasttrack.com/9. Now, let's get on to Blueberry PowerPress. First, you're going to install the Blueberry PowerPress plugin and get it set up with all your normal podcast stuff. If you don't know how to do that, there are plenty of great tutorials on YouTube to get that going for you. There's two I recommend. One is called How to Set Up Blueberry PowerPress Plugin Correctly. It's 9 minutes, 31 seconds. And you can find a link to that at podcastfasttrack.com/13. And the other is called How to Use PowerPress to Set Your WordPress Blog for Podcasting. That's by Daniel J. Lewis from The Audacity of Podcasting. And it's a pretty exhaustive tutorial, 51 minutes long. You can find that link in the show notes also at podcastfasttrack.com/13. Now, once you get PowerPress set up on your website, the first thing you want to do is go into your PowerPress plugin settings that are on the left-hand side of your WordPress dashboard. It's a blue little blueberry down there on the left, okay? From there, go to the top of the window that opens up and click on the iTunes tab. Once that window opens, scroll down the page until you see the iTunes Explicit drop-down and choose Yes, Explicit Content, if your podcast is going to contain explicit material most of the time. That will set your entire podcast to show on the iTunes directory as explicit. Now, there's two other options in that dropdown. There's the No that says display nothing, which literally shows no rating at all, which is what most podcasters choose. And then there's one that says clean, no explicit content. This is another option if you want to emphasize that your show is not explicit. Now, once you're done with all that, be sure to scroll to the bottom of the page and hit the Save button. If you don't and you close the window, you just did a whole lot of nothing and your changes are not going to appear. So make sure you hit that Save button. Now, one last thing. These settings take effect in iTunes only if you're using the feed provided by the Blueberry plugin. That is the feed you submitted to iTunes. If that's what you're wanting to do, you'll go back to Blueberry PowerPress settings, go to the feed tab this time, then copy the feed address you see there to submit that to iTunes. And that's going to make your setting in Blueberry the one that iTunes is going to read. Okay. Now, the good news about everything I just described to you is that if you're using the PowerPress generated feed, like I just said, you can go into these settings and make adjustments at any time. So keep in mind, what I just described is only for the entire show explicit tag. We're going to get to the episode level explicit tags in just a minute. But first, let's move on to the Libsyn publishing platform. Now, if you want to accomplish that same feed-wide explicit tagging on Libsyn, here's what you're going to do. Step number 1 is setting up your podcast with the right explicit setting. When you first log into your Libsyn account at libsyn.com, that's libsyn.com, you'll have to go through all the hubbub of entering your description, etc., like you would when you set up your podcast. If you've already done all that, you can skip this step, okay? So you're going to go ahead and do that as if you've never done it. And part of the process when you're doing that is going to give you the option to set what Libsyn calls your content rating. Now, if you've already set up your show on Libsyn, you can still change this setting at any time. But it's not really intuitive as to how you're going to do that, so let me walk you through it. First, once you log into your Libsyn dashboard, you're going to choose the Destinations tab at the top. Once you do that, you'll see a page full of options. Scroll down to the Destinations section and choose the Edit button on the one that says the name of your show. Then scroll down until you see the Content Rating option, and you're going to choose the one you want. Okay, explicit, clean, no rating. Be sure to hit the Save button at the bottom of the page. And keep in mind, this is the option you're going to use if you're submitting your Libsyn feed to iTunes. Okay, you can find that feed address by going back to your dashboard, Destinations, and copying the first feed link that you see listed there on that page. Now let's talk about episode-only explicit tags. This is for the scenario where you have an occasional guest who drops a curse word or whatever, and you want to be safe and you want to label that as explicit. So to set an individual podcast episode to be explicit, when the rest of the feed is not labeled that way, it's really not all that difficult. In Libsyn, it's very, very simple. So let's do that one first. On Libsyn, you're going to log into your Libsyn dashboard and post a new episode, just like you always do. You do that by clicking the Content Add New Episode option. And as you fill out all the information for the episode, you're going to come down the screen to an option that says the rating option. It's a little gray box. And under the iTunes Style section, you'll just choose what you want. Not set, which means no rating, explicit, or clean. Okay, then there's a TV style thing you can set there as well. Be sure to hit Publish or Schedule it at the bottom in order for that setting to take effect. Now that's in Libsyn on an episode basis. It's pretty simple. You just do it as you post it to Libsyn. Now in Blueberry PowerPress, setting the episode-only explicit tags is just a little bit different. It's not really more difficult, but there's one little tick box you have to set up before you'll have an option to choose explicit on your episodes. So you're going to go back into your Blueberry PowerPress settings on your WordPress blog. You're going to choose the Basic Settings tab at the top. And on the page that opens, scroll down to find the tick box that says iTunes Explicit Field. Tick that box. Now don't worry, you're not setting up your entire podcast to be explicit. You're just giving yourself the option to indicate if a particular episode should be labeled as explicit or not. Now, once you've done all that, you're ready to indicate specific episodes as explicit or not. But first, go to the bottom of that page and hit Save on your settings, okay? And then when you go to a blog post where you've already published an episode or where you're going to publish a new episode, and scroll down to the PowerPress field where you typically enter the URL for your media file. And there, now that you've set that tick box, you're going to see a convenient little iTunes Explicit drop down. And that's where you choose what you want. No, display nothing. Yes, explicit content, or clean, no explicit content. And then be sure to publish or schedule that post. That's it. That's how you set up your explicit tags the right way on episode-wide or episode-only levels. I'd love to know what you think of this episode, if it's helpful to you, and any other of my episodes by commenting in the show notes page. For this episode, it's at podcastfasttrack.com/13. And if you've got any questions about podcasting or topics you'd like me to research and cover on this podcast, I'd be happy to do it. You can reach me at Carey, Carey, that's how you spell that, Carey at podcastfasttrack.com. Thanks for listening. This show is brought to you by Podcast Fast Track, where my team provides professional podcasting services without the time suck. Full production, editing, and show notes all-in-one monthly subscription package. You can find out more at podcastfasttrack.com. Now go out and make it a podcastificating day. But what if it's not all as bad as that? What if... Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that, but I will quickly tell you that if a parent sets their parental controls in iTunes to block explicit blah. But if a parent... That's the Blueberry Power Press... Say that fast 5 times. The reason I'm talking... Before I get to that, though.